Hello. This video is for Chapter 2 of our ethics reading for this week, and we're going to be evaluating relativism, and this is part 2 of the Evaluating Relativism videos. So, as we ended the last video, we were looking for arguments against relativism. There are 4 common arguments against relativism, and they all sort of follow the same strategy. They begin with the supposition that relativism is true, then they each show that something unacceptable follows from this supposition. These 4 common arguments are 1. That relativism makes anything morally right. 2. That relativism means that moral reformers must be condemned. 3. That relativism makes moral progress incoherent. And 4. That relativism requires us to choose a single social group to dictate our morality. Okay, the objection that relativism makes anything right. So, the idea here is that if we accept moral relativism, then this means that actions like slavery had to be morally right if any society accepts it. So, do we think that slavery is ever morally right? If we don't think that it's ever morally right, then we have to object to relativism. This holds for any practice that's accepted widely by a society. So, perhaps infanticide, which is the killing of children. This is practiced by a variety of societies, including the Greeks. And so if you think that this could never be morally right, then you have to object to relativism. So ask yourself what you think of this objection and how, if it doesn't feel quite right to you, you think you might be able to get around it. Okay. Now, another objection to relativism is that it requires that we condemn moral reformers. So, if moral relativism is true, we must condemn moral reformers. The reason for this is because what dictates the morality in a society is what the majority of people in that society accept. So in our own society, if relativism is true, then this means that we'd have to condemn all moral reformers. So for example, do we condemn Martin Luther King Jr.? If we don't, then it seems like we need to object to relativism. So here, ask yourself what you think of this objection. The next objection is that relativism makes moral progress incoherent. So, moral progress requires some objective moral standard that we're moving towards. But the problem here is that this objective moral standard, the thing that we're moving towards, is exactly the thing that relativism denies. Relativism says that a society's moral standard is what that society believes and practices. So a consequence of this is that any changes to that society aren't progress, but are instead just simply abandoning the previous practices that were required by the moral standard. So, ask yourself what you think of this objection. The final objection we're going to consider is that relativism makes belonging to multiple social groups problematic. Relativism says that your morality is the morality of the social group that you belong to. But this brings up the question, what social group is it that you belong to? It seems like we all belong to various social groups. So, for example, I certainly belong to a social group of people who live in Umatilla County. However, I also belong to a social group of people who have PhDs in philosophy, maybe. I belong to another social group of people who went to the same schools that I did at the times that I did. And it seems like each of these social groups, maybe a social group attached to, if I go to a church, to that church, maybe a social group that is associated with my race, or another social group that's associated with my gender. However, it seems like the views that these different social groups have can differ. So, how is it that I'm supposed to choose which social group it is that decides what my moral values are? Okay. Now ask yourself, what do you think of this objection? So, here's a few questions to consider. Name some of today's moral reformers, or describe where you think our society is either making moral progress or is morally regressing. What practices in our society would you want to reform, and how would you want to reform them? What distinct social groups do you identify with? Do these groups differ in any moral beliefs and practices with you?